This episode is supported by Time Ghost Army Brigadier Josh Bruder and is a memorial to his grandfather John Philip Michael Bruder. More on that later. December 23rd, 1944. It began at the end of last week and continues all this week, a huge German offensive through the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Allied offensive operations on the Western Front came to a sudden end when the Germans began that surprise offensive through the Ardennes. The Allies were also on the move in Italy, Hungary, and Burma. They were street fighting in Athens, and American forces landed on Mindoro in the Philippines. A German airborne operation was set to go off the 16th as part of the Ardennes offensive, but it goes off the 17th as this week begins, with disastrous results. Strong winds and inexperience lead to scattered drops, and 2/3 of the 1,000 men are killed or captured. But the ground attacks continue. 5th Panzer Army boss Hasso von Manteuffel wants to get back on schedule by continuing attacks, infiltration tactics, through the night. So the week begins with that, and they have success. By dawn the 17th, 2nd Panzer Division is moving to attack Clare River crossings at Clairvaux. The Germans begin really overwhelming the 110th Regiment from the 28th Division and finally take Hosingen by the evening. In fact, at noon on the 18th, Clairvaux falls, and 28th Division's actions to delay the enemy from Bastogne are over. But they have pretty likely prevented a coup de main there, and have sabotaged the overall timetable, though the 110th has been annihilated by the end of the day. To the north, 6th Panzer Army are still trying to take Rocherath-Krinkelt the 17th. The US 99th and then 2nd Divisions face frontal attacks there. 2nd holds until December 19th, when they withdraw to join the 99th and 1st Divisions defending Elsenborn Ridge, backed by serious artillery commanded by Cliff Andrus, Gunner Supreme and new 1st Division commander. They hold quite securely on the ridge the rest of the week. Tomorrow, the 24th, the Germans will call off the increasingly futile attacks on that formidable position, which blocks 6th Panzer Army's original westward route. Slight backtrack here now. Joachim Peiper, commanding the 1st SS Panzer Division, expected to break through the American lines already in the morning of the 16th, but instead spent the day in a traffic jam behind the 3rd Parachute Division. Peiper has a reputation for brutality from the Eastern Front. 1st SS Panzer has been split into 4 groups. Peiper's column has 6,000 men and 72 tanks, though he's already lost 5 to mines. Peiper, as the armored spearhead, had strict instructions to follow a prescribed route west and to keep moving without regard to his flanks. He would both spearhead the breakthrough while causing chaos in the American rear. The German High Command believed such chaos, augmented by terror tactics, would cause a quick collapse among these soft Americans. He is forced to divert north already the 17th, though, to capture the fuel dump at Bühlingen, which he does, and 50,000 gallons of fuel. And then he pivots southwest. Now, there is no one between him and the line of retreat for those divisions on Elsenborn Ridge, so had he swung northwest, he could conceivably cut off 30,000 men, but he makes for the Meuse as per orders. Then the terror tactics, the brutality, begin just south of Malmedy. Peiper's column runs into Battery B of the U.S. 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. Over 100 Americans surrender, and after being stripped of rings, cigarettes, watches, and gloves, are machine gunned down. Then the SS men walk through the carnage for 20 minutes, kicking groins of downed men to see if they react, and then putting pistol bullets into their heads if they do. Peiper himself is not here for the shootings. He's moved on already. A dozen or more Americans managed to survive the Malmedy Massacre, though more than 80 are slaughtered. Peiper's group is now operating in the American rear. Should they take Malmedy, they could either attack north towards U.S. 1st Army headquarters and communications lines, or northwest towards Liège, which happens to be the biggest Allied fuel dump in Europe at the moment. 1st Army Commander Courtney Hodges sends the 30th Infantry Division to Malmedy, but they won't arrive till the next day. So all he has to stop Peiper well, to delay Piper, is a bunch of combat engineer roadblocks. At 5 p.m., after dark, Piper's column moves to take the bridge at Stavelot. On a hill, they come upon an engineer roadblock. The engineers briefly open fire on them with rifles and a bazooka. A mine cripples the lead German tank, and then the Germans withdraw. After a rapid advance deep into First Army's rear, Piper's column had met the weakest of opposition. He accepted his subordinates' appraisal that the Americans held the hill in strength. His own fatigue undoubtedly clouded his judgment. His column was strung out over 25 miles of poor, sodden roads, and his men were tired. The delay, by the narrowest, enabled Hodges to bring the 30th Division from the north to block Piper's penetration. The morning of the 18th, Piper resumes the advance, taking the Stavelot Bridge, but being repulsed at Trois Ponts. He heads north to La Glaise, but is blocked from going further by 30th Division, so he spends the night at La Glaise. Elements of 30th Division retake Stavelot the morning of the 19th, and Piper is now cut off from the rest of the division. The Germans spend the next 3 days trying to break a supply line into him without success, and today, the 23rd, he leads the remnants of his group back to German lines on foot. The spearhead has failed. As for Bastogne, which, if you look at the map, is the hub for a bunch of roads, taking it, and taking it quickly, is important to Adolf Hitler's plan. 26th Volksgrenadier Division is assigned to take it by the 18th, but they've had to set up crossings of the Our and Clerve, and then march on foot unsupported by armor, so it's taking them plenty of time to get there. Late the 17th, Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower orders his last reserves, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, to head to the area. But can they make it there before any Germans? 47th Panzer Corps is to bypass Bastogne and head west, and so, while the evening of the 18th, there are no troops between 2nd Panzer Division and Bastogne, they go round to head for the Meuse. Panzerlehr Division is also at one point around 10 kilometers from Bastogne, but they get bogged down on the track to Magret after being misled by some locals, and they dig in for the night. Anthony McAuliffe, acting head of 101st Airborne, arrives in the area ahead of his division, the 18th. Why acting? Well, Commander Maxwell Taylor is in Washington, his assistant is just now in Britain lecturing on Market Garden, and the Chief of Staff killed himself last week. So McAuliffe, Division Artillery Chief, has command. His men are to help defend Bastogne. As the 19th begins, the Germans still have at least a chance to take Bastogne by a quick, sudden strike, but only Panzerlehr is in a position to do it. They advance on nearby Neuf and are engaged by arriving elements of the 101st, but Manteuffel says, follow the plan, head west, and the infantry will take Bastogne. On the 20th in Bastogne, all its defenders are there. The 101st Airborne, some 40 tanks from elements of 9th and 10th Armored, a tank destroyer battalion, and 130 artillery pieces from 8 battalions. McAuliffe tells 8th Corps Commander Troy Middleton that evening he can hold out for 48 hours if surrounded. Half an hour later, the road behind Bastogne is cut, and they are cut off. The 21st and 22nd see a bunch of probing attacks by the Germans. Okay, at 11:30 a.m. the 22nd, 4 Germans approach under a white flag, with a paper demanding the surrender of Bastogne or they'll flatten the town. When this reaches McAuliffe, he laughs and blurts out, "Nuts!" He then sits down to write a response, but draws a blank, and he asks his staff for suggestions. They tell him that nuts is pretty hard to beat, so the Germans receive that single word typed response, which they don't understand, and ask if the reply is negative or affirmative. So an American colonel explains to them it is decidedly not affirmative, and it means go to hell, which they do understand. Well, already that day, McAuliffe's men are in an ammunition crisis. But the 23rd dawns with clear skies for once. Allied fighters force the German vehicles to hide in the woods, and 241 transport planes drop in supplies. So one crisis is over, but the main battle remains to be fought. as for 6th Panzer Army and Sanvit. Taking this is the task of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division, after first forming one of the pincers around Schnee, Eifel. On the 17th, Sanvit is open to attack, but the 18th doesn't have the mobility to get there. There's not real pressure against the town December 18th and 19th either, although the Americans can't counterattack to relieve pressure on their men on Schnee, Eifel. And the troops there face a serious supply shortage. The afternoon of the 19th, after being blasted from all sides for 2 days on the exposed snowy moor and hemmed ever more into a tiny perimeter, 2 of the 3 regiments of the U.S. 106th Division, nearly 7,000 men, are forced to surrender on Schnee, Eifel, the largest American surrender of the war after Patton so far. 6th Panzer Army's focus really turns to Sanvit, since it's clear they can't take Elsenborn Ridge and they need another route to the Meuse. And Sanvit has 5 main roads and 3 rail lines converging on it. In fact, on the 20th, 6th Panzer Army has 1 road for supply for 4 divisions, and by now, their traffic jam is of colossal proportions, even causing Manteuffel and Army Group Commander Walter Model to get out of their staff cars and walk to a planning meeting. However, now that 62nd and 18th Volksgrenadier Divisions are free after Schnee, Eifel, well, they can take Sanvit, right? The Volksgrenadiers invade the town backed with Tigers and drive the defenders out, though creating such traffic in town that Model again has to get out and walk. But here's the thing. If the Germans want to have a chance of success, they absolutely must develop their attacks before the weather can clear and the Allied air forces can fly like today, and to maintain momentum, they must take more road junctions like Sanvit, Bastogne for one. And back to the Americans for a moment. The evening of the 19th is a command meeting that Eisenhower opens by saying, "The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table." 3rd Army Commander George Patton says they should let the Germans advance all the way to Paris and then cut them off and chew them up. 2 staff officers reviewed the battlefront in detail. At least 17 German divisions had joined the attack already. The heaviest pressure could be felt at Sanvit and Bastogne. Atrocities had been documented. A persistent overcast also had grounded Allied planes. American strength in the Ardennes had doubled since Saturday to about 180,000 troops. More would soon follow. Ike, that's Eisenhower, Ike says the enemy won't be allowed to cross the Meuse, and the first counterattack hinges on Patton. Ike asks when can he be in place, and Patton says December 22nd with 3 divisions. Now, that might sound like bravado, and it sure does to Eisenhower, when you think just where Patton's 3rd Army is and what they'd have to do to get there in 3 days. But Patton has considered this already and has already made plans. He says he can manage a meeting engagement in 3 days and a coordinated attack in 6. He's sending force north on a broad front between Martelange and Echternach, with the 4th Armored Division assigned to relieve Bastogne. But resistance from German 7th Army, the southern screen, and the terrain do make progress slow, so they are not in place by week's end. As for 2nd Panzer Division, who bypassed Bastogne, on the 21st, they are 60-something kilometers from Dinant and the Meuse, but before they can reach it, Manteuffel has issues to fix. If he can bring up Panzerlehr on the left and the 116th Panzer Division on the right, then he'll have a good broad front for a real drive to the Meuse. But by week's end, not only is everyone exhausted, but gasoline for the forward units is not getting through, and they are becoming increasingly immobilized. So the last 2 days of the week, well, they don't achieve much. Model reverses the overall assignments already the 20th, with Manteufel's 5th Panzer Army now the Assault Army and 6th Panzer Army the flank protection, and sends in 2nd SS Panzer Corps the 22nd to hit Baraque des Frateurs. Now, U.S. 18th Airborne Corps has charge of all U.S. 1st Army forces south of Stavelot. But that front has multiplied in size, so 82nd Airborne Division, trying to hold a fair chunk of the Salm salient east of the Salm River, is in trouble. They are driven out of Ufalis the 21st, so when 2nd SS Panzers attack again at dawn today and succeed, the road to Liège is basically open. 82nd Airborne Commander Jumping Jim Gavin assembles what he can to protect the road behind Ufalis, but it's not much. However, the clear skies today release the Allied air power, as I said, and 2nd SS Panzer Division is forced to hide in the woods. Something else that happens in the West this week, on the 20th, Eisenhower shocks his generals by splitting the Americans into northern and southern groups and putting British 21st Army Group Commander Bernard Montgomery in charge of the northern group. This actually originated with Montgomery's own suggestion. You can imagine how well this sits with 12th Army Group Commander Omar Bradley, since that takes his 1st and 9th armies and puts them under Montgomery. Thing is, planners at command seriously worry that the German advance will sabotage communications between Bradley and 1st Army, since he refuses to move his headquarters dangerously close to the front, claiming that the loss of prestige doing so might instill panic among the men, which kind of shows a lack of confidence in the men, but still. Bradley's generals in the north are also frustrated by his isolation, and no staff officer has visited 1st or 9th Army since the attacks began. Still, when Bradley gets the word from Ike, he says he resigns, saying that he cannot be responsible to the American people if you do this. Eisenhower responds that it is in fact he who is responsible to the American people, and Bradley can't resign. Had all this maybe not happened, or happened differently, some real trouble between American and British command could have possibly been avoided down the line, which I'll get to in detail over the next couple weeks. One good reason for doing this change, though, is that it could bring in British reinforcements. Monty does have 30th Corps, a top formation, heading for the Meuse, though they'll mostly provide rear security, as it turns out. Montgomery arrives at Hodges' 1st Army headquarters and orders them to withdraw and shorten their lines. But much like with Bradley, for Hodges, giving up ground is anathema, and he refuses, and Monty gives in for the time being. There is some hysteria among the troops in general, though, the sole positive results of German Operation Greif, which is Otto Skorzeny and 2,000 men, including English-speaking ones posing as Americans, attempting behind-the-lines sabotage. In this, they utterly fail, many being captured, and most eventually dragged into battle as ordinary infantry. But the rumors fly that they are many. They are assassins. They are to kill the generals, and suspicion does lead to accidental shootings of those suspected. Over past the Eastern Front, there's politics going on in Hungary. I mentioned 2 weeks ago the establishment of the Hungarian National Liberation Front. This was the establishment of a new Hungarian government in Soviet-occupied territory. A national committee was first set up in Szeged and then 2 days later in Debrecen. The plan is for such committees to be set up in all Hungarian towns. Debrecen becomes the seat of the provisional government, and they've had elections for a provisional national assembly. This meets the 21st in Debrecen. There are 237 delegates. 71 of them are communists. The next day, the assembly votes a political council into power led by General Bela Miklos, who formerly commanded the 1st Hungarian Army, as prime minister. Still all provisional, and they still have to make some sort of armistice terms with Joseph Stalin. In early January, they'll send delegates to Moscow. The people of Budapest generally still go about their business as usual as both Christmas and the Red Army approach. I talked last week about the Soviet plans for renewing their offensive to surround Budapest, and this they begin the 20th. This is Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front and Fyodor Tolbukin's 3rd. And Malinovsky's attacks storm to the northwest from south of Shahi, which they took last week, covering over 30 kilometers the first day to reach the Hron River. 7th Guards Army advances over 15 to the Eifel River Valley, but here they are stopped by the infantry from the German panzers near Lake Balaton, and heavy fighting develops that lasts the rest of the week between the Eifel and the Hron rivers. Tolbuchen's attacks from southwest of Budapest on both sides of Lake Velence meet heavy resistance already the 20th, and progress is slow until today, when they manage a general breakthrough on literally a 100-kilometer front. After that, Tolbuchen sends 18th Tank Corps on his right for Esztergom. The immediate target in their path is Bicske, and today they flank it on 3 sides and will send in motorized infantry on the morrow. This will cut the road and rail leading west from Budapest, leaving only the mountain road to Esztergom in Axis hands. The 22nd, it's obvious to everyone that the Soviets are trying for a fairly close encirclement of the city, with Tolbuchen pushing for Esztergom. German Army Group South Commander Johannes Friesner tells OKH that without pulling in from the Budapest bridgehead to their inner defense ring to gain a division to fight west of the city will be surrounded. That night, OKH tells Friesner he's being relieved and replaced by Otto Wöhler, and Maximilian Fretter-Pico, who commands Gruppe Fretter-Pico, is to be replaced by Hermann Balck. Thing is, Wöhler agrees with Friesner, and in his very first talk with OKH Chief of Staff Heinz Guderian after his appointment, asks to take a division from the Budapest bridgehead. Guderian says it is not going to happen, and Army Group South has more than enough armor to retake the Lake Balaton-Budapest line. There is fighting in southern Europe this week, both battlefield and urban battleground action. In Italy on the 17th, 10th Indian Division has established a bridgehead across the Senio River. The 2nd New Zealand Division reaches the river the 19th. Corps Commander Charles Cately orders it and British 56th Division to now clear the area between the Senio and the Lamone and link up with the Canadian Corps. In Athens, the British counterattack against Elas, the military wing of the Greek National Liberation Front, EAM, begins the 17th and clears the path from Athens to the sea. But the battle has caused a crisis in the British government, blamed squarely on Prime Minister Winston Churchill. An MP points out in Parliament that the Germans did not bomb Athens, but now the Royal Air Force has, to subjugate the Greek people, who are now free of the Germans and on orders from Churchill. Churchill himself will arrive in Athens next week to try to end hostilities. The attempt to free others from Axis control continues this week across the world on Leyte in the Philippines. On the 17th, U.S. 77th Division heads north from Kogon and Ormoc. Valencia, at the center of the Ormoc Valley, is approached from 3 sides and soon secured. Now, to the north, 32nd Division has been trying to push south from Limon, but by the 18th, they are still like 20 kilometers from Valencia. That day, the 1st Cavalry Division takes over the lead, and with them heading south and 77th heading north, they finally meet up near Kananga the 22nd, completing the ring around the island. Palompon on the west coast is the next target. Already back on the 9th, the first supply convoy for Ormoc came in unharmed, but the one on the 11th was attacked by kamikazes, sinking destroyer Reed and badly damaging Caldwell. So the kamikaze menace continues unabated. However, as terrifying as the kamikaze tactic was, the success of the Ormoc envelopment, breaking the back of Japanese resistance on Leyte, far outweighed the cost. And on Mindoro, where the Americans landed last week, the 1st airfield is ready to use the 20th, and 2 others are being worked on. Fighters and night fighters begin arriving in force. Any kamikaze planes trying to reach the fast carriers of Bull Halsey's 3rd Fleet have to first evade them and the far-ranging combat air patrols of Tom Kincaid's escort carriers. And not that many manage this. The fast carriers, though, headed east of Luzon after last week's landings, where their tankers and supply ships are. The seas are choppy, though, and it's hard to refuel, so Halsey heads for hopefully calmer waters. Instead of calmer waters, the fleet heads into Typhoon Cobra. Although the capital ships survive it, the carriers lose 146 planes, and 3 destroyers capsize and sink, killing almost 800 men. The fleet then heads for Ulithi for repairs, which means the Philippines operations have lost carrier cover for at least a week and maybe more. And the week ends with the German Ardennes Offensive still failing to break through, Budapest nearly surrounded, and American progress on Leyte. And 2 days till Christmas. Christmas 1944. The sixth Christmas, yes, six, since the invasion of Poland and the spiral into a world war. Is anything different this year from last Christmas? Well, sure. Things look worse now for the Axis. The Axis powers have lost several members, the Soviets have taken enormous amounts of territory, and the Allies have arrived in force in Western Europe. But the Japanese have taken a big chunk of China, and though their navy has had it, their kamikazes are a terrifying new menace, and the Germans have launched a powerful attack in the West. I guess the easiest way to see the difference, for me, is to look at my script sizes. December 24th, 1943, was 2,893 words long. December 25th, 1942, was 2,909. This one is 4,105. In spite of it all, the war is bigger than ever. I mentioned at the beginning that this episode is supported by Time Ghost Army Brigadier Josh Bruder. He dedicates it to the memory of his grandfather, John Philip Michael Bruder. John was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on April 20th, 1920, into a family of Bavarian descent. He was drafted into the U.S. 2nd Chemical Mortar Battalion just 4 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, drafted on December 11th, 1941. Long after the war, he will relay his experiences to his son, also called John, who will then pass them down to his son, our Brigadier, Josh. John, the elder, served as a supply clerk and truck driver, taking the wheel of both the sixth-wheel GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck and the four-wheeled Chevrolet G506 1.5-ton truck. In 1942, he drove ashore in Algeria during Operation Torch. In 1943, he took part in Operations Husky and Avalanche, the landings in Sicily and Salerno. And in 1944, he arrived in the south of France with Operation Dragoon. In all these operations, John hauled supplies and ammunition to the front lines as his battalion provided fire support for infantry using the 4.2-inch chemical mortar. This mortar was capable of firing chemical, incendiary, and smoke shells in addition to regular high explosives. Fortunately, those chemical shells stayed locked away during the war. In late 1944, John and a detachment from his unit were assigned to the Red Ball Express, the vast convoy system of trucks ferrying supplies from the French ports to the troops. At its peak, almost 6,000 trucks carried 12,500 tons of supplies per day. It was exhausting work, and John will later tell his son, that was 72 hours without letting up. Just grab what you could to eat and keep driving. They were a wild bunch with more bent bumpers and fenders than the whole battalion. During the Battle of the Bulge, mortar fire was crucial for holding back fierce German attacks, and will be when Patton launches his counterattack, which I mentioned in today's episode. When that happens, the 2nd Chemical Mortar Battalion will be on hand to provide covering fire, and men like John and his trusty deuce-and-a-half truck will keep those rounds coming. If you would like to memorialize an episode of this series, you can do so by joining the Time Ghost Army at Brigadier level for 1 year, or by making a one-time donation. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com, and you can get all the information from timeghost.tv. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you after Christmas. No, this was after, yeah, that was right. You can cut it off right there, right? Yeah. I'll say it again, just say, okay. I'll do it, just do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you after Christmas, okay? Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you after Christmas.
Merry Christmas.